In the early years of Common Thread, we tried our best to buy kids' curriculum for our classes. Every week, you get a lesson, you get a craft, you get an activity, a paper to send home. It is super convenient. But more than once, when we were doing that, a teacher would come in before church started and say, Doug, we can't say this. Doug, I can't say this. I remember one Sunday morning, a teacher and I rewrote their entire lesson in the 10 minutes before church started. The lesson was on Daniel in the lion's den, and the teacher was prepared, but caught me beforehand and said, I can't say this, Doug. Here's in essence what the curriculum says. It says, bad stuff won't really happen to you if you're super devout. Now, other people, eaten by lions. But if you are true and pious like Daniel, then when you pray to God, God will make sure you're okay. All those other snooks, they'll get eaten for sure, but not you, not if you're one of God's favorites. So yeah, we rewrote the lesson. But hair on fire 10 minutes before church, that is not the best way to get ready for Sundays. So we came up with our very first governing principle. We got more later, but our very first one was don't teach our kids anything that they're going to have to unlearn later. Don't teach our kids anything they're going to have to unlearn later. Yes, their brains need concrete, and yes, their brains need stories, but let's give those things that they need to them in a way that they're not going to have to reject later. So, like I said last time, we don't do Noah's Ark because they're eventually going to wise up and realize after all the pretty animals they're going to see there's an ugly underbelly. We want our kids to develop discipline. We want our kids to behave, but let's not, as religion has often done, tell stories in a way that manipulates them or guilts them or shames them, stories that won't hold up when they get older. Because threat and punishment and reward, they're going to discover later on, that is not really how things work. I told those teachers back when we were still using the curriculum, if you don't believe it, don't say it. Now again, that also is not the best way to organize our content. Yeah, don't do that, don't do that. So a few years in, we undertook a project that we have refined through the years, and now we call it our 60-20-20 curriculum. 60-20-20 curriculum. Over a 3-year period, 60% of our lessons focus on the core virtues. We'll talk about why in a moment. 20% of our lessons focus on the needs of these kids in this community at this time. And then the remaining 20% in age-appropriate ways focus on religious themes in the way that we have been rethinking religion together over these years. So our community's approach to religion, all the rethinking we've done through the years, it kind of starts with this as a premise, that there's a baby in there with all the bathwash. Now, we're not unaware. There's plenty of bathwash. A lot of dogmatism in religion, intolerance, a lot of guilting and shaming, lots of manipulating and exploiting. There's fear, this whole hell and punishment thing, and inequity and discrimination and exclusion, they're all in there. But even so, our starting place has always been a thing lasts as long as religion has lasted because there's something precious in there, there's something valuable in there. So hidden under a whole lot of ugly, no argument at all, but in there is beauty to be found. And if we abandon it instead of rehabilitating it, it could well take a long, long time before we rediscover the deep treasure that was there all along. Maybe you've heard me use the term functional equivalent, talking about the language we use when we talk about religion. We don't use a lot of religious jargon. We try and find words that tap into shared and deep meanings. So what we do is we take a religious story or we take a religious practice and we strip it down and we strip it down and we strip it down, this whole deconstructing journey until we find a treasure that was buried underneath all the rubble. We unearth that treasure, we jettison the baggage, we rethink the assumptions that have gotten baked in over the years and the language that we've used, and then whatever gem was at the core of the story in the first place, we begin to build on that. Whatever gold was at the core of the practice when it became a practice in the first place, we've stripped it down to that place of finding the health and the life and the benefit, and then we build on top of that using functional language that reflects how the function of that thing worked in our lives. Well, that's what 60-20-20 is doing. The biggest piece of our content pie, the 60%, is the virtues. And it is because we have done all of this stripping down and stripping down and stripping down and rebuilding. And after having done that, after having stripped the whole journey down, the bottom line of the spiritual life is this: becoming our divine center selves. Now, there's lots of words that have been used for that: better angels, fruit of the Spirit, unity in the divine. But what all those words point to is becoming our truest, best selves. And that, it turns out, is virtue. All the practices that we do, all the stories that we tell, all the gatherings, all the buildings and the budgets, they're all about helping one another become our truest, best selves. And the word for that, not surprised, is virtue. The spiritual journey ends at virtue. The spiritual journey is about us becoming virtue. At some point along the way, we stop doing virtue and working hard to be virtuous. At some point along the way, the journey helps us become virtue. We do the stages of the spiritual life, again, going through Fowler's stages. We do the practices. We do working the circle. We do all the spiritual stuff. But the point is to become. We become virtuous human beings. We become kindness and respect and honesty and empathy and courage and justice. I've attached a handout with 20 virtues that we can focus on. So, the end of the spiritual journey is becoming virtue. So, when we were thinking about how we would build a curriculum for our kids, we decided to start with the end in mind. 60% of what we teach our children when they are in the very concrete stage of doing, in a way that's very appropriate to their developmental stage, we talk to them about the place the spiritual journey will eventually take them. We start with virtue. Now, here's the thing about that. We don't need to go buy a curriculum to talk about virtue. There is an embarrassment of riches on the internet. Even better, if you ask one of the new AI bots, ChatGPT is a good one, say, give me an outline for a 10-minute lesson on gratitude for a 10-year-old. What you get back is crazy, crazy good. Teachers and parents, you don't need Reverend Guy's help to talk about virtue and to do it very, very well. Here's what you can do, teachers. You can help our parents know what your focus is on any given week. And that way, they can then reinforce it at home. And that way, over the course of the 3 years, they'll get exposed to and reinforced in these core concepts. Maybe you could give them Google search suggestions. That way we can work together, partner with giving our kids as good a start as we can on the spiritual journey. So, the biggest piece of the pie, 60% virtue. Now, the first 20% in the 60-20-20, 20% of our lessons are specific to the needs of this group in this time. These elementary kids, these preschool kids, these teenage kids. That 20%, the subjects might change over time. Consequently, it'd be good teachers to be consulting with our parents. In what areas do our kids need help, growth? What would, parents, be helpful for your kids? Talk with the teachers about what that would be. I've included a few suggestions in the handout. I think we ought to be talking about bullying because that's a rising problem. Screen time, how we use media in general. In-grouping, out-grouping, inviting the outsider in. Mental health, emotional awareness, what we talk about all the time, afflictive emotions. But parents, teachers, you're going to know a whole lot better what we need to be talking about with these kids for this 20%. But once you do know, same thing. There is an embarrassment of riches online. All kinds of things about issues that are facing children. An abundance of resources to help us help our kids. So, the remaining 20%, the balance of these videos, that will be our focus. For this part, not many virtue resources because there's stuff out there. There's a lot to wade through to find good content, though, on deconstructed, rethought religion. I did write a book on this, but even though I did, I wrote the book for people who were coming out of traditional American Christianity, so I painstakingly documented it. It's got a lot of history in it, lots of footnotes, and it's long, and not a lot of people have time for long. So these are going to be a series of almost 10-minute videos, and I'll talk about how we talk about religion with our kids. That's going to be the balance of these videos. Basically, it's how I talk to my grandkids about God, about human nature, about sin, about salvation, how I try and meet them where they are and set them up for what's coming and the journey before them. It's also helpful talking through these things to help move our kids toward healthy spiritual journeys, because how we frame the story, you'll hear in a bit, is how things emerge in our lives. So, rest of the lessons, that's what we focus on.